Back for another episode of the Blue Turf. We actually got extra blue turf this last couple of games. This is Thad Bell from the Kansas City Soccer Journal. With me, I have Eric Bergerud, one half of the Kansas City Comets broadcast team, and I would say Twitch comment star. How are you today, sir?
I'm thawing. How's that as a response? That it's been a quite the cold week in Kansas City. We attempted hot winter nights last Friday. It wasn't so hot, but glad to be here today.
Well, the last three results have not been so hot. Utica at home, two on the road so far as we have broadcast this in Mexico at Monterrey. Utica, a overtime loss. Just what do you remember from that game? It's been a while.
Huh. Well, two things in particular on the negative side. One, back to the giving up the first goal, which Coach Stokic wanted to get away from. But for me, well, let me pause that thought. But the Comets actually played well the rest of the first half. They came into halftime with a 4-1 lead. You mentioned Twitch. Some UCFC fans had raised the potential of the apocalypse coming and everything's bad and let's just get rid of it all. And all of a sudden, the momentum shifted in the third quarter, and it felt like deja vu that this was the Comets' big problem last year, was coming out of halftime cold and either relinquishing leads or falling further behind in the third quarter. And we saw that not only with the Utica game, but in the most recent game at Monterrey, where the Comets led 5-2 at halftime. Both games for me, the third quarter was pivotal.
It was, and I wonder how much of that is Comets coming out flat, the other team making a change or getting some motivation. I guess it's always hard to know that without being in
Oh,
those locker rooms.
well, I think you can point to the opponents in both cases. In Utica, I thought their transition game was terrific in the third quarter, and I had a exchange on direct message with UCFC coach Everton. Uh, it was either later that night or the next morning, and I said, "Hey, congrats on your adjustments in the third quarter." And I got the impression he gave them quite the speech at halftime, and apparently it motivated them. But Comets, for me, the transition game flared its ugly head first against Utica, and then we saw challenges with it in that first game against Monterrey. And I think that's something that Coach Stokic saw because he made adjustments in the second game against Monterrey. But the third quarter in particular, UCFC adjusted. Monterrey flipped goalkeepers at halftime, and I think that changed the mood for sure in that third quarter in that second game against Monterrey.
No doubt. It is always an interesting thing to watch how teams change at after a halftime talk or sometimes just minor tactical adjustments. But it always is amazing how a team can be so different from one half to the next.
Yeah, and momentum's this fickle thing. You go into the locker room and you come out, and you sometimes just never know what's going to happen. It's an opportunity to pivot, but if you're leading by 3 goals, as the Comets were in that UCFC and then the second game against Monterrey, you have to be able to seal the deal in the third quarter and not take your chances in the fourth. And I think that if the headline of the first game in Monterrey was Coach Stokic saying that we learned a lot about ourselves in that first game, uh, I think that there's going to need to be a little bit of soul searching coming out of this stretch, because you can afford to take a couple losses, but ultimately, if the goal is playoff contention in a Ron Newman Cup, the tide needs to turn pretty quickly.
I know we talked at different points of this year about kind of looking at the schedule in different segments. We had the early Comets needed to come out, play well, get the new style, etc. We have the middle segment of the schedule, which is what they're into now, where they need to go against very tough teams, very long road trip, etc. So far, they're failing that this portion of the schedule. I mean, I don't want to be mean, but they are. They do need to figure it out, and that may make them a better team later, or it may just doom them to getting in the playoffs and not having any chance.
Well, let me put a positive spin on all this. I think the Comets showed in that second game against Monterrey that they can go toe to toe with Monterrey in a one game or potentially one game plus an extra game showdown down there. I think that they definitely changed their strategy. They got pushed around, muscled off the ball that first game. I liked what I saw of that Comets team. I didn't like the end result from a Kansas City perspective, but you had all the elements, and we can talk about goalkeeping too. But Leo Acosta stepped up, couple goals for him. Zach Regic continues his goal scoring streak. He's now the league leader in goal scoring, and scoring with both feet, scoring on set pieces, just scoring in the run of play. Self wall of scores. He's given Comets fans a lot, and I think the Comets will be encouraged, even though they lost that one against Monterrey, because every team's having a problem against Monterrey. I was not surprised the Comets were flat in that first game. I didn't expect the score to be 8-1 at halftime, but I wasn't surprised they came out a little bit flat. They needed to adjust to the quality of Monterrey and that playing surface. And I think that on both counts, they adjusted in game two.
Yeah, that was that first game there was not pretty, especially the first half. Again, the comeback a little bit in the second half. I don't know if that's Monterey taking the foot off the pedal a little bit or Kansas City making an adjustment. But the second game obviously was Kansas City making some adjustments, some different style, better mindset. Uh, Coach switched out goalies, and they looked pretty good that first half. I mean, I was a little bit worried. I was hoping originally that the first game against Monterey would be the game that they could do well. Coming in, they still had some momentum, even though they lost in overtime against Utica. They had a little extra day of rest against over Monterey, which is kind of rare, but that failed. So second game, not a bad bounce back. Coach talked to him after the game last night. He said that he was, of course, happy with how they responded after that first game. He's once he talked about how uh, some people had to have learned from that first game, things that he's been preaching all season that maybe didn't sink in. Some had learned it, some had not, and that may have been a factor in that.
Yeah, and I think that if one were to look at the video, forget the game one, let's focus on game two. I think that there will be some teachable moments about staying focused 100% of the time. I mean, somebody's great goal is another person's defensive lapse, and you can look at it either way. Sometimes it's a great shot is a great shot, but there are in both games too many players that had too much cushion, and both Kansas City goalkeepers faced a ton of shots,
Yep.
both on the Sunday game and the Tuesday game, and you would like to see more blocks, but in particular, you wouldn't like to see as many wide open shots, particularly on that size of field.
Especially on that size of field. And I know you and I kind of talked a little bit over messaging and stuff, but I was a little disappointed in maybe some of the veteran defenders not uh, limiting the shot quality as well as we would have expected from them. Maybe travel, maybe injuries. There's a lot of factors to it, but were you seeing that same thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't read minds, so I don't know what Coach Stokic said before, during, and after the game, but uh, ultimately to beat Monterey, you need to be disciplined. I think that the Comets took some chances in the game that paid off. The Comets took some chances in the game that paid off for Monterey. And so, I mean, I think that ultimately he's going to expect a team that focuses on fundamentals. But the work rate I thought was good in that second game against Monterey. They were following guys all throughout the field, pressing when they needed to, it was a good effort. It's going to take a great effort to beat that Monterrey team in a playoff series. But the Comets are definitely potential of that. In fact, I mean, for me, I'm more concerned about giving up points to UCFC at home than I am losing to Monterrey down there.
Well, I definitely agree with that. Uh, Going back to the second Monterey game for a second, the I asked coach about the switch from Neto to Philip, and if he could
Philly
talk.
E, Philip Ejimadu.
Uh, I'm not as good at that as you, but I asked him about that, and he said that they had looked at the first game, looked at what changes they wanted to make, and he specifically said Philip is a better shot stopper, obviously not as experienced in the league, so he made those mistakes, but he was really happy with Philip's performance in the game.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt that Ejimadu is a great shot stopper. I think that part of him growing as a goalkeeper, there's things that he's only going to learn from playing time. The distributions in particular, one I know he'd want to have back that he threw out of bounds that wound up being a top of the arc restart. Uh, just sort of funny backstory. There's somebody from Monterey who's pinging me throughout the recording. I'm sure he's trying to gloat and trying to get the Comets perspective. But back to the story at hand. I think that where he's going to need a little bit more time is on distributions and how do you get your hands on the ball and look for your options and reading the game. It's not so different from a quarterback having to make reads based on the defense that's out there, but the Comets, if they're going to want to succeed in the transition game, oftentimes it starts from the goalkeeper position. He can definitely shot stops there or stop shots. There's no doubt about it. Just going to need more time in game experience with his feet on the ball, his hands on the ball, and to look at how he can help quarterback the offense.
And I know ever since the beginning of the year, I think even preseason, we were saying that the qualities he has means that he will be challenging Neto for starts. I think he's doing that right now. It doesn't mean Neto isn't still the number one keeper or, the guy to go to for certain games, but he is going to be challenging Neto for starts. And
Yeah,
we
they
see that.
bring. I thought Neto made a ton of saves game one against Monterey, and I think there's some questions about focus. That there was, in particular, one sequence where the ball was to his right. He was trying to correct his defense, and Monterey whipped it to his left, and he was slow to react on a shot. But um, sometimes you make changes to send a message not only to the players involved, but to send a message to the team, and hopefully it's the we need to come together as a team. Coach Stokic preaches family, preaches togetherness, and this team is going to have to come together. Chihuahua, great team coming up in Friday's game. If they didn't have to play Monterrey, they'd be an undefeated team right now. They changed coaches, brought one of the indoor legends back, Janoni Martinez, whom some Comets fans might remember from his time playing for the Wichita Wings. But this is somebody who understands the indoor game, and they brought in Diego Reynoso, who was Monterrey's starter last year. In a way, both teams have flipped goalkeepers. Valdivinos went from Chihuahua to Monterrey, and now Reynoso from Monterrey to Chihuahua. So that's going to be a tough matchup for them on Friday. But I mean, ultimately, you can't let this Mexico trip define your season if you're any member of the Kansas City Comets.
No, that is one of my worries is that you get on a down streak and now your mindset's wrong. I did enjoy watching those games last night, probably as much as any road games. The broadcast was pretty good. The clowns were fun and entertaining.
Chili Willy. Woohoo.
Um, just the fans in the stands were entertaining. It was just a very fun atmosphere. It did get quite a bit chippy towards the end. I mean, it was chippy at various different times, but really towards the end. Um, and I know you guys probably I was listening to it in Spanish. It was in Spanish. My Spanish is not the greatest, although I am at 400 and some odd days in Duolingo. It's coming back. I could understand a fair amount of it. They were very entertaining, talking about refs and other stuff that you guys normally don't get to do.
Well, I'd say a couple different things. One is we have received guidance from the league in terms of what we should or shouldn't say on air. But I think personality wise, Nick and I try to avoid getting into referee bashing.
I think in general, you guys just always try to maintain a professional atmosphere, and I always compliment you and Nick and how you guys do things. There's several broadcasts around the league that I literally just turn the sound off and watch the game because I can't stand them, and I know you can't talk about them, but I can. But it's just a difference in stuff. But it was just kind of fun listening to them and how they approach things.
I, as a fan and broadcaster, I had no problems with the refereeing in that game too. I mean, I joke on air a lot about NPSL rules, which basically is no blood, don't call it, let them play. I prefer games where there are fewer 2-minute penalties, and that was my overall read on that. I think that momentum was a challenge for the Comets, and that was the issue ultimately. But to blame the referees for the outcome of the game, I mean, I think if the excuse me, the situation had been on the other foot and the Comets were attacking with less than 3 minutes left and one of their players had gotten grabbed, I think that Comets fans would have been demanding a blue card. So I mean, the referees are going to call what the referees are going to call. I don't have a problem with that decision. I saw a bunch of chatter online about whether that was a good call or wrong call, whether that should have been a straight 2-minute on Vandergriff or a blue card, excuse me, a straight foul rather than a 2-minute blue card on him. I mean, I saw somebody had commented if this was an outdoor game, that would have been a yellow card for a shirt grab and most of the time. And so I think that fans totally have the right to critique the referees. I think that's fine in any sport. What I would hope the Comets avoid is where the players start thinking that the referees are against them, because once you go down that road, bad things happen on the field. You ultimately need to play the game, let the referees do their job, and let the chips fall where they may. You take care of business in the first quarter, the second quarter, the third quarter, you're not going to find your back against the wall in the fourth quarter. And that's my take on it.
Yeah, most of the calls I really didn't have an issue with. I mean, they may have shaded one way a little bit, but most of them were pretty fair in the long run. Uh, Overall, it was just not good enough for the Comets, and Monterrey is a really good team, so that's what it really came down to. I know we also mentioned earlier about how we want to make sure that, or we hope that the Comets don't take this the wrong way and have I see a lot of those players are just going to will use this as a building to play harder. Um, After the Utica loss, I did a quick talk to Stefan and left. And as I was going through the back tunnel, I'll just go ahead and say it was Zach Reggett. He was alone in a tunnel on a table with his jersey off, just hanging his head, and you could just tell he was devastated by losing that game. I won't say devastated, but he was unhappy, upset by losing that game and the way it happened. And he comes back and scores a couple goals, and the guy is just going to always be a dangerous, but you can tell he's a guy that's going to use losses as motivation to play even harder.
Yeah, and I think that there are up and down the roster players who want to win for each other, want to win for the fans, want to win for the city, and will use this as an opportunity for motivation moving forward. They get past Chihuahua, and there's a revenge match on the near horizon in Utica. And then you go back to Baltimore, which now they will have had a lot of experience playing on a small field as they look ahead to Baltimore, and then a return trip to St. Louis. And so, no, they can't let this this week define them this week in Mexico define them, but I think they can use this as a motivating opportunity. What are we going to do differently when we get back to the United States? What are we going to do differently on the road? Keep in mind, before they made the Mexico trip, they were undefeated on the road. And before that Mexico trip, the only losses were at home. And so this is a team that has shown they can win on the road. I just think you're seeing a potential MASL champion team there in Monterrey, and it's gonna take even more the next time they play them.
Yeah, to play down there is always going to be tough. The field, the crowd, all that stuff. Maybe not being able to take all your players, all of that comes into play there. I do want to just like over these three games, even though there was losses, recognize Zach still on a scoring streak. Nacho is we've kind of mentioned him several times this year is maybe not the guy you think is going to be scoring a ton of goals, but he's still knocking in some goals, playing really really well. Leo Acosta is stepping up. Mikey Lennis is still he's scoring a goal every other game, not too bad for a rookie. So there's definitely highlights in here in this team, both veterans and young players.
Yeah, what I hope doesn't happen, and I'm not foreshadowing anything, predicting anything, but I saw one fan suggest of a different team suggest that the DRC, the Discipline Review Committee, needs to take a look at the fourth quarter last night. I kind of hope the league just lets it go and move on, because ultimately it was a hard fought game, and I don't think either team wants or needs suspensions at this point. These things happen. People get upset in a tight quarter, and Monterrey, there's definitely some tight quarters there. I mean, I think that overall, Comets fans should be pleased at how this team has evolved. I know that once you're in first place, anything below first place seems like less than, but ultimately, what's going to matter is what happens in the playoffs. And as San Diego found out last season, you can be terrific and unstoppable in the regular season, but you lose your concentration once, you miss an assignment once, nobody's going to remember how good you were at the end of the regular season. They're just going to remember which team lifted that cup.
Absolutely, and I think ever since the beginning, we've saw that it was Monterrey was the likely favorite to win the division. It would take almost perfection for Kansas City to do so. And that's what we're seeing right now is Kansas City is a better team than they were last year. They have still levels that they need to improve. And that's just the way
Well,
it
yeah,
is.
no, I think that's fair. And I think that ultimately, we'll see which four teams wind up representing the East. I think for sure Monterey's there. I think UCFC looks solid. I have no reason to think that either Milwaukee or Kansas City will fade. But no matter where you are, you're going to find yourself in a 2-game series plus a potential extra game against some quality teams. And
Yep.
There's an old expression about being battle tested or battle hardened. And I think that this week in Mexico, that will test and hopefully harden the Comets.
It's definitely testing. The hardening, we will have to see if what the final result is. I do think it is doing some of that for though.
I think that's right. I think that's right. And Chihuahua, that's a very tough place to play in if you're a road team. Corner Sport Arena. It's if the Comets have had any benefit, it's playing on a relatively equally small surface in Monterrey. So it's not like they're doing a one game down to Chihuahua like other teams have had to before. So this is a week of close quarters for the Kansas City Comets. And as I said, they have Baltimore looming after they get back to the U.S. So it's important to take the lessons you learn in Mexico and not forget them at a place where they haven't been as successful as maybe they were in previous years.
True. Um, Anything else we need to cover today, Eric?
We'll see who's starting in goal on Friday for the Comets. I think what's interesting for me is I spent a lot of time during that first Monterrey game interacting with fans, and I think some Comets fans know where I stand on Neto, but it was just sort of interesting to see how the goalkeeping chatter had dissipated when Ejimadu was in goal. And for me, it's just too easy to look at the goalkeeper and to blame everything on the goalkeeper. And I think that Comets fans who have now watched the three games recently, if they're trying to take a step back and say, oh, where can we get better? It's not changing goalkeeper as the magic solution to get better. I mean, ultimately, you have to stick with your runs. You have to make sure that you're in the place you're supposed to be in place, and you can't get countered the way that Kansas City got countered by UCFC last Friday night. You take care of those things, the results are going to come.
Very true. It is always going to be. It's a good problem for coach to have is which goalie do I put in, because that hopefully means you got two of them playing at a fairly high level. And none of what I was saying earlier like is negative on net though. He's still one of the best keepers in the league. But everybody does have lapses. Everybody does make mistakes, and I know we have looked at games where we said, "Oh, this former MASL Defender of the Year could have done better, and that would have maybe prevented a goal." Things like that. They do some spectacular things. I'm not trying to blame any one of those either, but Neto makes some spectacular saves. Everybody has to be able to maintain that perfection, that attention level at all times, and it's hard.
Well, here's the other thing. In some ways, it's an unfair game because on the defensive side, your mistakes get spotlighted, but the attackers need to score goals too. So there are there's I won't call it blame. There's enough responsibility to go across the roster that one or two players shouldn't shoulder all the responsibility. If everybody's scoring uh, on the goals that are expected, if everybody's playing the transition game well, if everybody's marking defensively, and what I mean by marking defensively, it's not just the defenders, it's midfielders, forwards. If everybody's doing their job and the goalkeeper comes up big, chances are you're going to win most games.
Yep. The goal of keeping it under 4 goals for the opponents has not went so well for the Comets the last few games, though.
That's true. We were last week. I was projecting out what a year with Nicolau Neto under four might look like, and that seems like a distant memory. 3 games past, right?
Maybe it comes back.
We'll see.
It's it's up to coaches to straighten all that out. It's up to us to try to talk about it. All right. Any words of wisdom, famous last words there, Eric?
Well, tune in Friday night for the Comets, and we'll have a bit to talk about next episode, pivoting from Chihuahua to rematch against UCFC there in the odd.
All right. Thank you for the time, and we are out.